Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the kitchen at Andersen Acres. Today we are going to make French bread. French bread is actually really complicated, even though it's a very simple recipe. It takes a long time and there's a lot of waiting involved. So we are getting started really early in the morning because this is going to take all day. It's going to be night before this is ready. And even then, it may not be ready till tomorrow. Either way, let's get started. The first thing you need to do is you need to make basically a starter for your French bread because your French bread has to rise slower and longer than your standard breads. So it's called the pouliche, actually, the starter that we're making. It is not like sourdough. Sourdough you want to let go sour for at least a week. This you only need to do it for a few hours. So you start with 3/4 of a cup of flour. It is important that it is a white or a bread flour. This does not really work with a whole wheat or a rye or anything else. So it absolutely has to be this. It has to be. Sorry, I was grabbing a whisk. Anyway, so you want your 3/4 of a cup of white flour. You want to add to that 1/2 cup of water. Mix that up a little bit. Now, obviously, water and flour is not going to do anything by itself. Not anything. So, into this mix, we are going to add about 1/2 teaspoon of traditional yeast. You do not want to use quick rise or bread machine. It's important that it has the time to relax and rise. Quick rise will just do it a little bit too fast. So we just gently, it should absolutely look like this. It should be wet and gooey, and this is not dough. This is just your starter. So with this, we are going to set it aside. I'm just going to pop this lid on, and I'm leaving the whisk in because you don't want the lid airtight. Just set a lid on. If you don't have a container with a loose fitting lid, you could just put a piece of plastic wrap over top. Just make sure it's not airtight. So we're going to let that sit for at least 4 hours. Probably closer to 8 is best, but do not exceed 10 hours. Once you get into the 10-hour range, it starts to become more like a sourdough, and you don't want a sourdough. We're making a French bread. So we'll come back in a few hours and see how this is doing. It should start to rise on its own. So we are back, and the starter for our French bread is looking pretty good. You want it to look about like that. If it doesn't look like that, you're not ready yet. This will take at least a few hours, possibly overnight. So you want it to be bubbly and gooey just like that. So to continue, we want 2 cups of flour, again, a white flour or a bread flour. We want to take about another 1/2 teaspoon of traditional yeast, regular yeast. Mix that in there. Mix that up. We're going to use our fingers. I've taken off my jewelry because you're going to have to use your fingers anyway. About 1/4 teaspoon of salt. I'm using Himalayan pink salt. Any salt will do. Kosher salt, table salt, doesn't matter. Any salt at all. Then we're going to do about 1/2 cup of warm water. Barely lukewarm. You don't want it too hot. Give that a mix. Now it's going to look like there's not enough water. There is. And fair warning, this dough is very sticky. It's supposed to be. So you might want to have a damp paper towel to wet your hands on, or a small bowl of water, just because if your hands are slightly damp, there will be less sticking as this happens. So because it is such a wet dough, there's not really as much kneading. We pull and turn, but not like we would. So that looks pretty good. Once it looks like that, you're ready to add our starter. You might as well use your hand because you're going to have to get gooey anyway. So you might as well just use your hand to scoop it right out of that bowl. Get all of it. Sorry for blocking the camera with the bowl. So here's our starter. Here's our dough. We're just going to start mixing that together. And I can already smell that the starter, it's not soured. Sour is what you want when you're doing sourdough. So it's not sour, but you can definitely smell a difference than if you had just straight up made your bread. instead of letting your starter sit. So it's a good idea to plan to do this overnight, just because you may have to let it sit longer than you think. But in my humidity and temperature right now, it actually only took about 3 hours before it got like that. Longer is nicer, but I can do it after 3 hours because it was smelling pretty good. So we're just going to keep doing this. We want it mostly combined. Okay, so you want to take the wetter parts of the dough and kind of scrape the sides. But it's still going to be a very soft, slightly sticky dough. It's supposed to. Okay, now this is going to take the rest of the afternoon. So we're going to come back several times and do basically the same thing. And you'll notice I'm doing a little bit of kneading. This is just to finish incorporating everything. But your dough will not be as smooth and elastic as doughs that we normally make, because this has much more water. It has a little less flour. So it has still 1 cup of water total, but it's a quarter cup short on the flour. So you'll notice it's quite sticky. So as we come back each time, we will wet our hands just a little. You don't need to wet them a lot. You want to wet them just a little bit. If you wet them a lot, your dough will get way too wet. Just enough to lubricate your hands a little so the dough doesn't stick as much as it's sticking now. This is normal for right now, and I'm just going to use the dough to wipe the sides of the bowl here. And we're just going to leave it to rise, because we're going to have to bother it a lot to get it the consistency and texture we want. So we're just going to leave that where it is right now. Sorry for moving the bowl so much, but that happens when you're kind of kneading it. So we kind of did a little knead, not a full 10-15 minute knead. So now we're just going to leave it for about 20 minutes, 20 to 30, till it starts to loosen up a bit. So in the meantime, we'll grab, this is the cover for this bowl, but I'm not going to put it down. I'm just going to loosely cover it just to keep the humidity in. So we'll come back in 20 minutes and see how it looks. All right, so our dough has been relaxing for about 20 minutes. So now it is time to start sort of kneading. You don't really need French dough. So what we're going to do, and we're only going to do this 3 times. I'm just actually going to wet my hands. Not a lot of water, just a very little bit. Just so you have a very little bit of a coating so your hands don't stick to the dough. So what you're going to do is grab, pull, anchor it with your other hand, kind of give it a stretch, fold it over. Now you're going to turn your entire bowl a quarter turn. Grab, stretch, fold it over, push. One more time. Grab, stretch, fold it over, push. Okay? Then we're going to take it, turn it upside down, and we're going to wait another 20 minutes. And we're back again for round number 2. We're going to do exactly what we did before. Again, dampen our hands, not by a lot, just enough. So you're going to pull, nice and stretched, fold it over. Quarter turn. Always turn in the same direction. Stretch, fold. Quarter turn. Stretch, fold. Turn it over. So that was round number 2. We're going to have to do this 4 times. So we'll see you again in 20 minutes. All right, we are back for round 3. You can see it is rising. We're going to dampen our hands. So you can see it does start to rise. It rises slower because 1, there's no sugar. 2, there's not as much yeast as there might normally be. And 3, we want it to go slower. That's what makes French bread good. So, round 3 here. Stretch, fold. Quarter turn the bowl. stretch, fold. Quarter turn again, stretch. See, it's harder to stretch by the third time. That's a good thing. Fold, press, flip. Now I am covering the dough between each round here. So there we go. Just make it a nice ball. So we will have to come back and do that one more time, and I do cover it. I don't always show that, but always cover your dough in between. You don't want it to dry out. So back in 20. All right, so we are ready for our fourth and final twisty turn here, the pull and fold. This is the fourth one. A little bit of water on our hands so it doesn't stick. So again, last time, I promise. Pull, rotate the bowl, pull, press, rotate the bowl, pull, press, flip. So 20 more minutes, and then we will actually do something else with the dough, I promise. All right, so that's the last time, I promise. Now we get to do something else. You take the bowl away, form a nice ball with our dough. We're going to cut it in half, okay, because we're going to make two. All right. It's better to cut it than tear it, just because this particular kind of dough doesn't really like to be torn. Set one piece aside. Take the other piece, and we're going to kind of flatten it with our hands. Kind of pull it so it's more rectangular. Okay. Fold in these ends and pinch, because we want nice even ends. Nice even ends. Then we're going to take this up together, pinch this, closed. Give it a bit of a roll. Don't worry about the ends. This isn't the final form anyway. Give it a bit of a roll. Set that one aside. Do the same thing with this one. Push it down, give it a pull. Fold your ends in. Where we're making nice French bread here. We're going to make two baguettes. So they won't be true baguettes. I'm not going to make them that skinny. So now we're going to take our two, just line them up, and you just want to cover them for another 20 minutes. So I'm just going to invert the bowl over top, and we're going to come back in 20 minutes after they've relaxed a little bit. All right, so now we can actually start doing things. We're actually going to be able to flatten these down, re-roll them, and put them in a pan to rise. Now, just to show you what kind of pan I'm going to be using, this is actually designed for baguettes. So you'll notice it has a lot of holes so that there's a lot of airflow for when they rise and when they bake. They rise and bake in this. You can just put them on a cookie sheet. In fact, I put this on a cookie sheet when they're baking. But that's what I'm going to be using. You don't need that. You can simply put them on a cookie sheet. And the reason they're divided in two, instead of being one long one, like you often see baguettes in the store, is most of us don't have ovens that are long enough. Okay? We just don't. We don't have a big enough oven to cook an entire huge long baguette. One of those 2.5 foot, 3 foot long baguettes you sometimes see. So I'm doing two. So they've rested for 20 minutes in this shape. So now what you're going to do, find your seam, press down. You're going to press down with your palms, kind of rock it out, push it, stretch it, nice and long. Okay, that's what you want, nice and long. Long as you can fit on your pan anyway. Obviously there is a limit to how long you're going to be able to go. So again, you want to fold your ends in, push, fold your ends in, push, bring it up, and pinch. Okay? Bring it up and pinch. You want this seam pinched really well. And you're pinching the end as well this time because you really want to make sure that it stays together. So pinch your ends, pinch your seam, give it a little rock back and forth. Lay it down over here. Do the same thing with the other one. So push and rock. There's a reason to shape them like that. It's so that they become airier. There's a lot of air trapped in there. You want that in a French baguette or French breads. You want to get as much air inside the dough as possible. So when you fold it up, you're trapping air. That's excellent. A lot of times we tell you to push the air out of your dough. Not this time. This time you want that air. So again, flatten it. Turn your end in. Turn your end in. Pinch the end. And pinch your seam. So you notice how I'm not pushing down. I'm rolling up because again, we want that air in there. That air will help us get a really nice bread as it rises because it traps the air inside. So that's fantastic. Pinch, pinch, pinch. Lots of pinching. And give it a nice roll. You want to make sure it's roughly the same thickness all the way along. So if you have a spot that's a little bit thicker, you want to give it a little bit of a roll. So then we want to get our pan. And I'm just going to tuck these on here. I'm tucking them on the ends. I could have made 3 because this pan has space for 3. But I didn't make 3. I made 2. So we're just going to tuck them right on the pan. We can overhang a little bit. It's not that big a deal. Okay. And we're going to set this aside to rise until double in size. That'll probably take 45 to 60 minutes. So I'm just going to pop mine in the microwave just like this. And we'll come back and check them in about 45 minutes. We'll see how they're doing. In the meantime, we're going to come over here and set up our oven. Now, we're just going to move this. We don't need that there. So you want to move your oven racks. You notice I have one on the very bottom, one in the middle. That's really important. So on your bottom one, you're going to take cake pan, just a regular cake pan, and you're just going to slide it on the bottom oven, right there. Sorry for the loud noise. Just slide it in. Just going to sit there. You want that to get hot. Okay? Close the oven up. You do want your oven hot. So we are going to set the oven for 450 Fahrenheit. Okay? And we're going to let that heat up and get all ready. I like to turn the oven light on. So we're going to let that warm up. Cake pan in there. You're also going to need ice cubes when we start to bake. So get your ice cubes ready. Obviously leave them in the freezer until right before you're about to use them. But make sure you have enough ice cubes. You want 1.5 cups, 2 cups of ice cubes. And then we just wait till our dough is risen. All right, so we're looking pretty good here. They've puffed up nicely. I'm happy with their size. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to slice them because that's what you want. So you want to go about 1/4 inch deep, not too deep, and you want to do diagonal slices. So slice, slice, slice. So 1, 2, 3. There's not a specific number of slices you need, just about that far apart. So the next thing we're going to do, we have to do this kind of quick, so I'm just going to move this out here. I'm going to have an oven mitt on just because I have to pull a pan out as well. Remember the cake pan that we stuck in here. So we need humidity to get that nice crisp crust. We could coat these with water, but that's actually not the right way to do it. The right way is to get a bunch of ice cubes in here. So what we're going to do, we're going to take this guy, shove him in the oven. We're going to take this pan that's been in there. We are going to take our ice cubes, get get this back in the oven. That will create humidity. Now we're not going to open that for at least 25 minutes. You want to cook for 25 to 40 minutes. Okay? 40 minutes if you want it darker, and 25 if you don't. So check it at 25 minutes. Do not open the oven. You want those ice cubes to create that humidity to get a nice crisp crust. So we'll be back in about 25 to 30 minutes to check on our bread. And there they are, completed French baguettes. A little shorter than you might be used to just because of the size of my oven. They are piping hot. They were in the oven for 25 minutes. You can leave them for longer for a darker bread. And when you break them open, this is hot, so it's going to hurt. Ow. Look at how nice and fluffy that is. And the crust on the outside, nice and crisp. So that is all for tonight. I hope you enjoyed making French bread with me. Hopefully you'll try this yourself. And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.